Hello and welcome to episode 5 of I Want to Talk About You, interesting conversations with interesting people, hosted by me, Tim Russell. And this week we have a very personal episode on a topic I've been wanting to do a podcast about for a long while. 2 years ago, in February 2024, at the ripe old age of 55, I was diagnosed with ADHD and probable autism. I'd struggled all my life with work, relationships, money, depression, etc. And things had reached a point where I felt that I needed to know why and get some help. So I found a psychologist here in Bangkok and got diagnosed. A year later, I wrote and published a book about my experience of late life ADHD diagnosis called So That's What It Was, available on Amazon. Check the podcast description for the link. And to try and promote the book, I messaged pretty much every ADHD podcast, website, magazine, social account, etc. that I could find to try and get a review or a shout out or a guest slot. And not a single one out of about 50 emails got back to me, not one. So I thought, right, fuck you. If you won't have me on your podcast, I'll bloody well start my own. And that was the genesis of I Want to Talk About You. Like Latte Larry's coffee shop in Curb Your Enthusiasm, it's a spite podcast, or a spite cast, if you will. So once I finally got the podcast off the ground, I wanted to do an ADHD episode, and I came across today's guest online. He's based in the US. He was diagnosed with autism and ADHD at age 35 and has gone on to found his own non-profit organization to support people with the condition and to help organizations accommodate them better. He's also a professional voice actor and regular podcaster, so you'll probably notice that this episode sounds a lot more slick and professional than usual. His name is Michael Ruffin, and last week we got together and had a good chat about our respective experiences of adult ADHD, which, as you'll hear, are quite different. And we shared some advice for other adults who are thinking of getting diagnosed or have been already and don't know what to do next. It's also an interesting listen for non-ADHDers who want to understand more about the condition and learn about how they can support, or at least not piss off, friends and relatives who do have ADHD. We had a couple of technical glitches, which I've mostly edited out, but there's a point just after the hour mark when Michael's voice goes a bit muffled for a couple of minutes, for which I apologise. We've got this far without any technical glitches, so I'm sure you'll forgive this one. So here we go, the adult ADHD episode of I Want to Talk About You with Michael Ruffin. Michael, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
For people who don't know you, just tell us a little bit, first of all, about where you are, where you're speaking from, and who you are.
Yeah, I'm Michael Ruffin. I currently reside in Kentucky in the States. What I do, who I am, a big part of my life is a late diagnosed ADHD and autistic person that kind of led me into kind of making a career out of that. I first started with content creation, where I did a lot of educational content about ADHD and autism, and that picked up quite a bit, which then led me to becoming a coach, which then led me to starting a peer support group because I wanted to provide accessible support for people because coaching and therapy and things of that nature can be inaccessible for a lot of people. So I started a free peer support group that became really, really successful. And that ultimately led me to starting a nonprofit called Dueling Minds. So we can kind of expand and grow and help the larger ADHD and autistic community. That's kind of like one side of the coin, and kind of the other side is like I'm also a voice actor. I do some writing. I still do content creation. I stream on Twitch. I'm a big nerd, so I love like tabletop. I love tabletop role playing games. I also I'm a what's called an actual play performer. So I do live stream performances of like Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletop systems, kind of on like a professional level on that side. Multifaceted. I do a lot of different things, as is normal for many ADHD people.
Yeah, we tend to have quite a low boredom threshold, don't we? So,
Yeah.
I didn't realize that you could do Dungeons and Dragons at a professional level. That's news to me.
Yeah. It's an industry that's still kind of finding its footing. I mean, it's been around for a while. One of the bigger, like, gosh, I'm sorry. One of the bigger people that have kind of brought it into the light, that brought in a lot more people playing Dungeons and Dragons, is a group of people called Critical Role. I'm not sure if you've heard of them. They are a group of professional voice actors that they were just playing home games, and then they decided to live stream it and record it and put it up, and it just took off. And they've been doing it for like for a while. I can't remember how long. I think it's been at least 10 years. Um, but in that span of time, the industry, got a lot more attention. It blew up. It got really big, and so there's a lot more opportunities in different places where people develop their own systems. So there's a lot of game design elements to it. There's a lot of professional level streaming and recording, so you have production and marketing and all that stuff. So it's become a pretty interesting and fun industry to be a part of.
Wow. So you said you were diagnosed fairly late in life with ADHD. How old were you when you first got diagnosed?
So I was it was a month before my 35th birthday, and exactly a month. Technically 34, but basically 35.
And how did your diagnosis come about? Was it something that you'd been thinking about for a while? Were there signs of it when you were a child? And why did it happen at that particular point?
Well, there were moments. I remember vividly moments throughout my life where I'm like, what's going on? Am I autistic? And that was the big question, because I would have a lot of difficulty with friendships and relationships and communicating and connecting with people. And that was a really big part of my life, and it was really frustrating. And then I struggled a lot with college. High school was easy for me. I not to brag or anything of that nature, but high school was easy for me. But then I got to college, and I didn't have any supports in place. I didn't really know what was going on. There was a lot of other life stuff happening too. And then eventually, by the time I started working, would get fired from jobs, so job hopped around a lot, and was very kind of struggling and lost and wondering what's going on. And it kind of spiraled into a lot of just depression, anxiety, trauma, and just I reached a point that just kind of broke me a bit. As something happened in my life that just caused me to spiral. And I've always been really good at metacognition, so thinking about thinking and my own self. So during the that episode, I was like, this is not right. Something's wrong. This is not me. This is not how I normally behave. This is not how I normally react. What's going on here? So I started doing kind of research into my experiences, which led me to different things about ADHD and autism. And I was like, I'm going to get into therapy. I joined different support groups on Facebook. One called wow, I can't remember. We have ADHD, I think it was called. And yeah, so through therapy and just my own investigation and stuff, it kind of oh, this is my therapist and psychiatrist were like, yeah, we should get you assessed for ADHD. They assessed me, got diagnosed, and then about 6 months later, I got assessed for autism, because I was like, okay, we're on medication, things are good, but I'm still having there's some pieces missing to the puzzle. And they're like, yeah, we've been talking, thinking that you're also autistic, so we'll get you assessed for that too. So and that's just kind of where I am now.
Was it easy to get assessed in the US? Because I was reading yesterday that in the UK, where I'm originally from, I live in Thailand now, but in the UK, I think the waiting list for adult ADHD, if you want to do it on the National Health Service, is something like 5 years. If you want to go privately, it obviously costs quite a lot. How easy was it for you in the US to go through that process?
For me, it was surprisingly easy. And that is very much a privilege that I experienced, because I know several people in different parts of the United States that have similar experiences where they have months to years of wait, or they don't have insurance to be able to cover the cost of getting assessed. And assessments can cost, thousands of dollars. So there's a lot of like yes and no that, like, depending on where you are. I was just fortunate enough that I had a really good therapist and psychiatrist and team, and luckily my insurance at the time covered it.
One of the things I was diagnosed 2 years ago, even later than you. I was 55 when I got diagnosed, which I think is quite late. I've not yet found anyone who's been diagnosed later than that. I'm sure there are. One of the things that I noticed was that it was like shining a light on a lot of things from my past that I'd never really thought about. Did you find that as well? You suddenly look back over the previous sort of 35 years and thought, that's why
Oh,
that happened, or that's why I behaved in that way.
oh yeah, there was it was life changing. I mean, in a lot of ways, it was life saving too. That, like, there was a a big revelation that came with a lot of different emotions. Like, there was grief, there was anger, there was just like all kinds of things, but ultimately relief. Ultimately, like, oh, like, I'm just not a failure. Like, there's something going on, and like I need to support myself. I need to learn what this is. I need to learn, how it affects me, and I need to learn like how I can move forward with this knowledge. And that's what I've been doing ever since getting diagnosed. Um and, and yeah, like, you'd actually be surprised. With my peer support group, we've had age range of people all the way from like 18, 19, all the way up to like 60, 70. In our peer group, there's a lot of different people at different stages of life learning about this.
And what advice would you give to, say, someone who's an adult, 30, 40, 50, thinking, maybe listening to this podcast, they're thinking, yeah, maybe that resonates with me, maybe that's me. Would you advise them to go out and get diagnosed straight away?
It, this is one of those questions that is kind of going to be up to the individual, right? Like, how, um, like, where are you in your life right now? Do you think it's going to benefit you, with this knowledge? Do you think that it's impacting you enough that you need like medication, right? Like, do you think you need that kind of support? Or, like, if you're also autistic, there are um, services out there that you can get even as an adult for autistic support. I know adults that have like carers that come around periodically and help with different things. So there are a lot of different benefits to getting assessed and diagnosed. It is, I would say it's up to the individual, but for me personally, it was a life changing experience. It was confirmation that it's not a defect in myself. All right. It helped me build better self esteem. It helped self worth, and learn more about, how my brain works. um, Now there is a discussion to be had too of like self-diagnosing, right? There are a lot of pathways to supporting yourself without getting an official diagnosis, as long as you are doing the research and looking into it. Self-diagnosing is completely valid. Typically, it is like a first stepping stone to getting an official diagnosis. But as I said before, diagnosis can cost thousands of dollars, and if you don't have that, you kind of are stuck with where you are. So I think ultimately is like, yeah, look into what ADHD is, look into what autism is. Does it resonate with your experiences? Understand that there are other things out there that have similar experiences, that they are their own individual thing. So, like, trauma can play a role if you have PTSD or CPTSD, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, OCD. All these different things can kind of appear similar, but you can also have experience all of them. Like, you can be ADHD and autistic. You can be ADHD and autistic and have OCD. Like, so you know, it's like do the research and figure out what the best path is for yourself.
Yeah, it's interesting because I always, like you, I always felt there was something a little bit weird going on, a bit strange going on. Because like you, I struggled to hold down jobs. I occasionally struggled at school. And then I was on a flight back in about 2017, 18, and I saw a documentary about, do you know Chris Packham? Have you heard of Chris Packham?
My name doesn't ring a bell.
He's a British wildlife TV presenter and environmental campaigner, but he's autistic as well. And there was this documentary about his life with autism, and I was watching it and thinking, shit, so much of this resonated with me. So I did the sort of self-diagnosis tests when I got back, all these various online tests, which aren't clinical tests, but
Yeah.
I think in a lot of cases they're probably a good indicator. And I was scoring really high. I mean, top level in each one. But I didn't do anything about it at the time because life was going pretty well. I had my own business at the time. My personal life was okay. So I didn't really act upon it. And it was only sort of late 2023 after COVID when things started to go a bit pear-shaped, shall we say, that I finally went and got diagnosed. I'm probably not in the same boat as you yet because it was 2 years ago and I'm still kind of in my head coming to terms with it a little bit. But takes me on to what my next question was for you, which I think we've already answered, was has the diagnosis changed your life for better or for worse? And I think with you, we can clearly see that it's had a massive positive impact on your life.
Yeah, and from my experience with just working with, I mean, hundreds if not thousands of people, um, I have not come across someone who had a negative impact from their diagnosis. Um, so I think, majority of people, there is going to be a benefit. Could there potentially be a negative impact? Possibly, depending on your living situation. But in my experience, I haven't seen that.
Did you tell everybody when you were diagnosed? Did you sort of announce it, or were you a little bit careful who you shared the information with?
Um, I told like the people closest to me, and then I became a content creator. So like I started telling, like, yeah, like, uh, there's videos out there from me, from 4 or 5 years ago that reached millions of views, hundreds of thousands of views. So there's a lot of people that know. And because of now, like, the work that I do, I'm really not shy about talking to people and telling people. um that is the position that I'm putting myself in. I know a lot of people do kind of keep it close to their chest because you never know how someone's going to react. And I've seen that personally where, like, I tell someone and I see an immediate shift in how they approach me, how they talk to me, how they treat me. Oftentimes, not intent, like, I can tell that it's not usually intentional. Sometimes it is, but there are, like, it's one of those things that's like, it's like a switch, right? Like, oh, I tell them, like, oh, I'm autistic. And because so many people still don't know what that means, especially in someone like myself. I've straight up gotten people to tell me, like, "Well, you don't look autistic," and I'm like,
How do you
"Well,
look autistic?
yeah, and like, sure, there can be visual markers of autism, especially in like moderate and high support need autistic individuals, um, but that's kind of the thing. Like, people don't realize that you know, not everyone is going to present a certain way. But even though, like, I tell them I'm autistic, and then they kind of treat me like maybe I'm not as intelligent as I am, or like kind of like infantilize me a little bit, and like, you know, and just like they start talking down to me, or they start, like, the way they approach things is like, I can, it's their kind of like bias showing, and and not understanding of what autism is. And that can be really frustrating to deal with, when people suddenly flip a switch and see you completely different just because you tell them you're autistic.
Yeah, I mean, I when I was diagnosed, and I told quite a few people, and some people were like, "Oh, you know, you seem quite normal. You seem like a very sort of intelligent guy," as if ADHD affects your intelligence, and you can't have it if you're intelligent. And I think that was an issue at school as well, because I was pretty bright at school, even though back when I was about 7 or 8, there were quite a lot of behavioral issues. I think it was just kind of swept under the carpet a little bit. Oh, he's doing well at school. He's one of the bright kids. Let's leave him alone and maybe he'll grow out of it. And I'm guessing it was probably the same for you.
Yeah, with ADHD, a lot of people don't understand how it presents. They think that it's like you're disruptive or you're
Yeah.
hyper and you're always bouncing off the walls and
I'm the
yeah.
least hyperactive person in the world. I mean, it's
I'm
like
the same way.
no one could ever describe me as hyperactive.
Yeah, and that's why there's like the three types of ADHD, right? You have the hyperactive, impulsive ADHD. You have your wow, my brain is not working correctly. But train of thought, hyperactive, impulsive, combined type, and what is the third one? Wow, I
Isn't the
this
third
is
one
part.
just the lack of attention, the
Uh,
attention deficit side of it?
um, There is inattentive, inattentive. There we go.
Inattentive, yeah.
Yeah, so there's hyperactive, impulsive, inattentive, and combined. And the inattentive ADHD is you're less hyperactive physically, right? Like,
Yeah.
you're still hyperactive, but it's more internal. It's more your brain is like, yeah. Um, you can be a little bit more dreamy. You can be a little bit easier distracted. You could experience a lot more like memory, things happening, like I'm having right now. Like this is part of being ADHD, and like people don't think that way. Like they're like, oh, you just don't remember, or like, oh, maybe you're just not smart, right? Because I forget details, I forget information. My memory recall is really affected by it. Um, so yeah, like there's a lot of different aspects to being ADHD that um, people didn't really know, 30 years ago. Um, and so like now that we have a lot more information, a lot more awareness, a lot more people talking about it, we have a better understanding.
I mean, at the moment, there's a lot of talk about ADHD because there's been a huge rise in the number of diagnoses in the last few years. I was reading that adult diagnoses have gone up 5 times over the last 20, 25 years. Why do you think there's been this huge increase? Are there genuinely more cases of ADHD? Are we getting better at spotting it? Are people a little bit more open to talking about sort of mental health issues and getting diagnosed? Is it a combination of all those things, do you think?
Yeah, so there's a really good analogy about this. So back in, I think it was like the 1950s, the percentage of left-handed people was only at 3%. So only 3% of left-handed people of the population was left-handed. Um, and that was because people were forced to write right-handed, and there was also like a demonization of left-handed people, right? Like if you were left-handed, you were like looked down on, right? Which ADHD behaviors and things of that nature, you were looked down on. Especially 40, 50 years ago, if you were ADHD, there's a high chance that you probably got punished for your behaviors that were ADHD. And so when that kind of awareness of left-handed people, right? Like um like people started accepting that left-handed people just exist, and stopped forcing them to write with their right hand, the percentage of the population of left-handed people rose to 15%. So do you think just more people became suddenly left-handed, or do you think they were always there, and now that there's a lot more acceptance and awareness that there is a higher percentage of left-handed people? And that's kind of the same thing with ADHD and autism, is we have a lot more awareness. We have a lot more people talking about it. You have adults getting diagnosed because their children are getting diagnosed, and we know that both ADHD and autism are heritable. They are genetic neurodevelopmental disorders, so you can inherit it from your parents, and that's where a lot of people that I deal with are like, yeah, my child was diagnosed, and then I got tested, and I got diagnosed. So that's where we are right now. We're in that rise because of the better tools that we have, the awareness, and just overall acceptance of ADHD and autism.
What was it like for you when you? I mean, how old are you now, Michael? If I can ask you.
I'm 39.
39. So you're 60. So you're slightly, a bit of a different generation to me. What was it like when you were at school? Was there much awareness of ADHD there, or were you sort of brushed off as being lazy or disruptive or whatever? Did you get much support?
No, like, yeah, no, I really didn't have any awareness whatsoever. It never came up in conversation to me, of the possibility until, like in my late teens, early 20s. But even then, it wasn't like you are ADHD is like, um, it's just more of like, this is a thing that we are going to look into. Like in high school, I was one of those kids that didn't really try very hard because school was easy. So there's from there's kind of like some jokes in the community of ADHD of like the burnt out gifted kid, where a lot of ADHDers were like the really gifted kid because they were pressured and they hyperfixated on school, and like they really excelled in school. And oftentimes that was to compensate for the things that they were struggling with without realizing it. For me, I was a bit the opposite, where I probably could have been in like the gifted programs, but I didn't try, and my parents never pressured me. They're like, if you pass, you pass. Like that's all they cared about. Um, and so anytime like my grade would dip, that's when I would try. And then like in classes that I found interesting, because ADHD is an interest driven, brain, I would excel at, and that's kind of how I made it through high school. And like I remember a friend of mine, she would talk to me and like you were so frustrating in high school because you made everything so easy. And like I would be struggling working like my ass off and everything, and you would just be coming up to me and going like, oh yeah, just do this, this, and this, and like completely show them how to do it. um but like my grades didn't always really reflect that, because I didn't have the push. Um, so yeah, there was one time I was seeing a therapist and he was testing for ADHD, and I say that in quotations because his way of testing me for ADHD was playing a game of speed, a card. Like I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. I'm not sure if there's a different name for it. um Basically, you both have your own half of the deck, and when you lay a card down, if you have a matching, the first person to slap it gets those cards, and the objective is to get all the cards. And there's like there's different rules like sandwich and stuff like that. And that was his way of testing if whether or not I had ADHD. But I love that game because I played it all the time in high school, and I was a really competitive person. So, like, of course, I was going to focus on it, and I was going to beat him at that game. And he was like, "Oh, well, normally ADHD people can't focus on this." I'm like, "You don't understand." Like, looking back, I'm like, he just did not understand ADHD. So yeah.
It's interesting what you say about it being, being good at some subjects and and not so good at others. Because at school, I think I really frustrated the hell out of my parents and teachers, because there'd be some subjects where I was like top of the class, top of the whole year in French, getting 95% in exams. Other subjects where I would have just looked like an idiot because I was getting 15, 20%. Because there were some subjects where they may as well have been teaching them in Japanese or Chinese for all I
Mhm.
understood of them. Most kids, I went to a pretty good school, secondary school, and most kids were generally pretty good across the board. They'd be good at all the 9 or 10 subjects we were doing. I'd be up here in some subjects and just way down in the others. But no one I just got called lazy. I mean, no one analyzed this and said, well, how come you've got this kid who works so hard and is so good at these 2 or 3 subjects? Whereas in others, he's just absolutely not interested. And it didn't seem to ring any bells at the time.
Yeah, and it's also like one of those things too is like when you're good at something, especially as an ADHD person, it doesn't feel like we're working hard, right? Because we're interested, and so it kind of comes a little bit easier to us, and we understand things pretty quickly when we are interested in that thing.
That's what I
And
did well
so
at university, I think, because at university I could choose like one subject to
mm,
really home in on and study, and I loved it, and I did really well in it. And like you say, it came easy. I didn't really have to work for exams. I saw other people like studying all night for exams. Nah, no problem for me. So that was an environment in which I really thrived. But put me in an environment where I've got to be interested in or be good at multiple things, then it's not going to happen.
yeah, and I think that's where like education could be better for neurodivergent brains. And, when we talk about like accommodations and adjusting things, whether it be workplace or education or anything like that, it's not just for our types of brains. Typically, when you accommodate us, it's going to benefit everyone. And that's kind of like a lot of the work that I do and want to do more of, especially when it comes to like consulting workplaces and developing training and awareness in those spaces. Is like when you accommodate an ADHD or autistic individual, it's not special treatment, right? We're not getting like, oh, we're not being favorites. It's like you're accommodating us, but you can apply that to everyone. And typically, everyone's going to benefit from those same accommodations.
When you talk about accommodations in the workplace, and we're going to talk about the workplace a bit later, but what do you mean by what sort of accommodations can companies do to make life easier for ADHD people and autistic people at work?
There's a lot of different things. One thing is having clear specific instructions. So, oftentimes where I would be in a workplace and I would get a like, hey, if you have time, can you do this thing? Right. And my brain is like, oh, I don't have time to do that. So I'm not going to do it.
Exactly. I've been there so many times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then I would get in trouble because I didn't do the thing. So being more clear, more direct, and like, hey, I need this done. Or even having a system of importance or priority. Because one thing that ADHDers do struggle with is understanding and knowing priority in tasks. So if a manager or person can be like, hey, this task is red priority, this task is yellow, this task is green, because one thing that can be really disruptive for us is if we're focused on a task, right, and we're working and then another one comes in, that can throw our whole system off. Because now we have to reassess which is priority, like what needs to get done when, and like it can throw off our thought process, and it can, it can take a while for us to get started again. So interruptions can be really harmful to our productivity. So in workplace environments, having systems that if an interruption is needed, addressing like, hey, this is a cert X priority. So we know that like, oh, I can continue working on my task and I can look at that later.
Or recognize when Michael's in the hyper focus stage and just stay away from him and let him.
Yeah. Yeah. Even that, allowing us to listen to music, that's a simple one. Allowing us to kind of get up and walk around, if we need to, because sometimes we do need to take a bit more breaks than other people just because of how our brain works. One thing that is can be a struggle for us is transitions. So transitioning from one task to another task, we usually need kind of like a buffer time between that. So there's a lot of different things that you can accommodate. And some companies might be like, "Oh, that's a waste of time," blah blah blah. I'm like, but really, like, it's a bigger waste of time if I'm sitting there stressed out and anxious and struggling to get even started than if you just let me walk around, listen to music, and like take 10, 15 minutes and get back to it.
And yeah, and that's something that benefits, like you said, it benefits everyone, doesn't it? It doesn't just benefit people with ADHD. I'm sure, yeah, anyone else who doesn't have ADHD would benefit from being treated that way as well.
Yeah. Like just think if you implemented a priority system for everyone, right? Where like, hey, this is a green priority, and that way everyone understands like, oh, this is you can set parameters of like green is like a 4 week out deadline, yellow's a 2 week deadline, and red's like a 1 week deadline or whatever. Like you can set those parameters and people understand, and you can work more efficiently that way.
So you're now in a situation, I think, where from what you say, where you're mostly self-employed. How do you cope with the typical executive dysfunction that comes with ADHD without having someone telling you what to do? Because every time I read articles about time management for ADHD people, it's always, I'll make a list or use this productivity app. And I think these apps are clearly designed by people without any experience of ADHD, because if, telling someone like me to sit down and make a list of things to do and then tick things off that list as we do them is a complete waste of time, because there's no way I'm going to be able to do it.
Yeah, at first I did it very poorly. I'm not gonna lie. It took a lot of trial and error. That's why, like, you'll hear a lot of people like the best thing for an ADHD person is to become an entrepreneur, and I'm like, for some people, structure is a blessing for a lot of people, and there are times where I definitely wish that I had that structure of someone telling me and knowing exactly what I need to do every day, because that was a big struggle at first. Was I would wake up and I'd be like, what am I doing today? Like, I don't have a plan. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I know where I want to be. I know what my goal is, but now I have to break that goal down into actionable steps. And I have to learn how to implement those steps and move forward and do the thing. So that was, a big learning curve for me. And ultimately, kind of what I have discovered is a lot of different things. So, first of all, is listening to my body and my mind and listening to like how I function and stop trying to meet expectations that are not set by myself. So, like societal expectations of me is like, oh, I need to be working 40 hours a week. I don't do that. I can't do that. I did that. I actually did more than that before, and that led to me burning out really, really bad. That was another point in my life where I had a job, and there was a day where I woke up and I said, "I can't go." I just couldn't go. I couldn't go to work, and it wasn't a send a message to my manager saying I quit or any of that nature. I just never went back to work. I never answered another text from them. I never, like, it was, I completely ghosted because I just couldn't do it. Like, I didn't have the capacity. And for like the next 8 months, I barely got out of bed. It was bad. So now it's like, I can learn how to accommodate myself, right? I can learn how to support me. So I take frequent breaks. I allow myself to do a task and then do something that I'm interested in, and then kind of switch back and forth if that's something. There are days where I work 8 hours. There are days where I work 2 hours. It just depends on my day, how I'm feeling. And there's a lot of trial and error of learning, okay, like what structures do I need for myself? Deadlines don't work for me. So I if it's the external deadline, like from someone else, that works. But if it's myself setting it, it doesn't work. So I try not to set those unless it's like an absolute necessity of like, oh, I have to get this done. And yeah, so I take my goals, take what I want to do, and I break them down. I ask myself often, like, what is my next step to accomplish this task? And sometimes it's like, oh, I just need to email someone, or maybe I need to like message a person about something. Maybe I need to like, oh, we haven't had a meeting for the nonprofit in a minute, so I need to set a meeting. Like, it just depends on like where I am, what needs to get done. Um, so for me, it's a lot more flexible, um, and it's slow. That's one thing. For me, it's slow. It's not at a pace that some people expect. It's not at a pace that I used to work, because that pace uh, hurt me. Like it was bad, right? And so now I go at a pace that is comfortable for me. And sometimes it's frustrating because I wish I can do more. Because I'm not sure if you're familiar with the spoon theory of like disability. It was
Mm.
created for like lupus, I believe was the uh, I I think that's correct, but it was a person that had a chronic illness, and they were describing to someone what a day is for them. And it's like they start every day with 10 spoons. And every single task that they do for that day takes a spoon away. And so once they're out of spoons, they're done. And some days say like showering. Some days showering is a 1 spoon task, but other days it might be a 3 spoon task. And that's kind of what it's like living with disability, because ADHD and autism are disabilities. And so it's all about what your needs are and how to support yourself. So there are days where for me, showering it's very easy. I get in, shower, do my thing, and get out. And there are other days I'm like, this is a really big task, and it takes a lot of energy. So
Do you take medication at all? Would you advise people with ADHD to take medication?
I'm all for whatever improves your quality of life. Do it. If that's medication, um, if that's whatever you find that improves your quality of life, that doesn't hurt you, do it.
Because when I was
Um,
first diagnosed, the therapist recommended that I try Ritalin. And the
mhm.
first, I was sitting at work. I was working back then. I'm not working now. I was sitting at work, and I took this Ritalin, and after half an hour, it was just like, and I didn't notice it at first. And it was after half an hour I noticed I'd been absolutely focused on this really boring task. Normally, I can get hyper focus on things I like, no problem. But it was just this really boring task, and I realized I was just completely lost in it. And I thought, wow, imagine how much I'd get done if my brain was like this all the time.
Yeah,
I don't take it all the time. I only take it if I've got something that I really need to concentrate on that isn't
yeah,
necessarily something I particularly enjoy. But I have found it really, really helpful.
yeah. I am currently back on medication. There was about a 3-year period that I wasn't. Um, and so like when I first got diagnosed, I was on medication for about a year. But uh, cost, but like our healthcare system in the US is not the best. So it started costing me like $100 a month. And one thing that we do struggle with is finances.
Yeah,
It's something I've always struggled
yeah,
with.
completely.
Um, I still do, but I'm getting a lot better. Um, and for that year, like that year was a life-changing year for me. Um, because I was able to build a lot of foundations and support systems and learn a lot. So when I couldn't afford the medication anymore, I was still okay. Um, and I was in a better mental place as well, that being off medication wasn't as impactful. But recently, actually, I just got back on medication recently. Like things started getting harder and harder the longer I was off of it. And I started noticing that it was starting to affect my mental health again. And I was like, okay, I need to get back on medication. And I have been for about a month now. And you know, I definitely notice a difference.
You mentioned before about how difficult it is being in the workplace with ADHD. You mentioned the job hopping, and that's something I can definitely sympathize with. It's a bit of an ADHD cliche, but for me, the workplace is always like being asked to play a board game where everybody else knows the rules and you don't, and where you can't always read the room, where you can't always interpret instructions, like you said before. If you've got time, can you do this? Which you and me would interpret as, well, I haven't got time, so I'm not going to do it. Um, And yet it's a situation that your livelihood depends on. And it can be really, really, really stressful for us. You mentioned in the previous podcast that I listened to you that you did, you said we have to put in an awful amount of energy just to exist, just to get to work and just to be in that situation. The
Mhm.
energy that's then required to actually read the room and understand what people expect from us, actually get the job done, is huge. What advice do you give to people who really, really struggle to, to be in the office every day?
The radical answer is find a new job.
Yeah, well,
Uh,
that's yeah, well,
yeah,
yeah.
that may not be
Don't do it.
realistic.
Basically, try
Yeah,
to avoid it.
yeah, that's a not always a realistic answer. But if that's not an option of finding something that fits your brain better, um, some of my clients that even in environments that they enjoy, it still can be challenging. Um, and I think a lot of it is um, learn what you need, and that can be a hard thing to do because people aren't really used to thinking about themselves in a way of, oh, I need support, right? Like especially in work culture is like, oh, hustle, you gotta do this, you gotta do that, like you have to show up a certain way, you have to put on this presentation of who you are, you have to be efficient, you have to do all these things. And that can kind of get into your personality of like, oh, I don't need support, I can do it, I can just push through, right? And that can be really really harmful to us, and we don't realize it because it's like we keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and then we crash. So if you're starting to feel like I can't do this anymore, or this is becoming really challenging, or I haven't been able to do, like I can't do the things I used to do, you're probably in burnout already, which is something that you definitely need to take seriously and address seriously. Um, because burnout has kind of become like a buzzword. But when you really look into what it is and understand the severity of burnout, um, in extreme cases, it can lead to chronic health issues that could lead to death. Like, and that's not being hyperbolic. That is a real thing about burnout. And if you are having got reached that point, it can take up to 3 to 5 years to fully recover from it. So it's really important to start focusing on your needs. What supports do you need? How can you start implementing new systems in your life that are going to support you? And I say systems and not necessarily routines because routines, especially for ADHDers, can be challenging. Um, we set up this perfect routine and we're like, okay, I'm going to do this day and this that day and this that day, and like I'm going to have this routine, and then we build it and then it falls apart, or we build it and it works for like 2 weeks and then it falls apart. So what I do instead is I build systems. Systems are flexible. Um, e- they are fine tuned to you and your needs. So how I was talking about like every day my energy can be different. And so if I wake up and I'm feeling sluggish, if I'm feeling really, really low energy, if I'm feeling, like my like brain fog, like sometimes my brain feels like there's like a vice grip, squeezing my brain. Like if I'm feeling that way, I'm not going to try and do all the things, right? Like
Yeah,
I'm going to listen to my body and like, oh, this is a low energy day. So I'm going to start implementing my low energy system. I'm going to focus on self care. I'm going to focus on small tasks that don't take a lot of energy. And I'm going to listen if I try to do something and my brain, like, and everything's just fighting against me, I'm going to stop and then I'm going to decide and like, okay, I'm taking a day off. And that can be frustrating. And sometimes in workplaces, like if you have a job that you have like a 9 to 5, that may not be always an option, but you can like, you know, but if you feel safe enough to, talk to your managers and stuff like that, that's something you can do.
That's what I was gonna ask. I mean,
Yeah.
is it something people should share in the workplace? Should, when you're diagnosed as an adult, should you go to your boss or your employer and say and tell them about it? or is it something you should keep secret? I guess it depends on the workplace, doesn't it? Really?
Yeah, I wish I could say yes. Go talk to your
Yeah, because
bosses.
I was quite open about it, and then I was basically maneuvered out of the door within about a month.
That's that's a
So
that's a that's a common experience, and I think that's still because of people not understanding what ADHD and autism is. Because we make good workers when we are interested in the work that we're doing. We make excellent workers.
exactly, and
Um,
one of the things I think is what I think is good, but employers don't seem to think is good, is I think ADHD people are very, very focused on results. Our problem in the current employment space is that we're not very good at necessarily following processes or documenting the processes that we've gone through to get that result.
yeah,
And it seems in a lot of cases, companies, certainly I found in my experience, are far more concerned about those processes, or about, like you said, representing in a professional way than getting the job done. And I think that's something that we struggle with quite a lot.
yeah, and I think that's another room for accommodation, right? Of like, if documentation is a requirement of the job, how can we make that documentation process easier? And maybe we can work with management to um out for uh later deadlines for documentation, or and be more flexible in that area, and so like in workplace environments, it's one of those things. It's like, if you feel comfortable talking to your management, your boss and things like that, go for it, right? Like, it has the potential to be incredibly beneficial to you, um, but it also has the potential to be detrimental. So it's, one thing that you can probably do is look into your current employment and see if they have any existing programs that focus on, like, disability support, and what kind of policies they already have, and what kind of things they have implemented, if they already have resources. And if they do, then that could potentially be a good sign that the company you're working for is going to be a lot more open and accepting. If they don't, then maybe inquire about it without telling them, like, hey, like, this, I'm just curious, like, do we have any of these things? Like, what's our company policy on these things? And find out, and ask, like, be curious and ask questions before disclosing.
Yeah. Which brings me on to the subject of masking. Obviously, masking is a big, I mean, all people, I think, neurotypical people as well have to mask to a certain extent to get through life. But I think it's harder for ADHD people. I'm currently, do you know Gabor Mate, the writer? Have you read his books? He wrote a really good book on ADHD a few years ago called Scattered Minds. And I'm currently reading his latest book, which is called The Myth of Normal.
I'm
Um,
personally not like, really fond of Gabor Mate's take on ADHD, because he has some really not accurate perception of ADHD when it comes to the brain, because he definitely has, like, it can be acquired, and that's not true.
Yeah, and he also talks a lot about it being brought on by trauma in childhood, or about specific incidents, which I don't think was the case for me. But in his latest book, there's quite a good chapter about this concept of attachment versus authenticity. Are you aware of this theory that humans, we have all these attachments? In order to get through life, we have to have relationships. When we're kids, we have to be
Mhm.
attached to our parents to survive. We go to school, we have to have relationships with our schoolmates, with our teachers. Then as life goes on, we have to build relationships with wives, husbands, boyfriends, girlfriends, employers, work colleagues. And in many cases, particularly when you have ADHD or autism, you're having to suppress your authentic self in order to do that. Because if you showed your true authentic self, then maybe people wouldn't want to have that relationship with you so much. How do you manage that balance between keeping these relationships but also remaining your authentic self without having burnout?
So, there are oh, sorry, my train of thought just got derailed. There's a lot of thoughts going on at one time, because you mentioned masking, and
I'm really talking about masking, and how often we
it,
have to sort of suppress our
yeah,
true selves just in order to get through life.
yeah. So there are, so masking is one aspect of a larger thing called camouflaging.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard that. So
Yeah.
camouflaging is compensation, masking, and assimilation. These are different things that we do as, especially autistic individuals, but ADHDers can also do this. Is how we operate and interact with the world around us. So, um, you're talking about how do we build these relationships and connections while being authentic? And my perspective is our masking selves are still parts of us. Um, and masking as a whole is not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be harmful, right? Like masking can be harmful, and it has been like and it takes a lot of energy, and it is a thing that can affect us. Um, but masking is also a survival mechanism, right? We use it to survive. And so we have to be aware of its use and need and existence in building connections. Now, how do we form relationships and be authentic? Well, that's understanding yourself, who you are. Because one of those questions that I asked myself, that many people ask themselves, especially late diagnosed, is like, well, am I just a bundle of traits and symptoms? Like, who am I? Like, do I have a normal, like, do I have a unique experience in life because all these other people have these similar experiences as me? And ultimately is yes, I'm still a unique individual. I still have my own perspective. I have still my own interests. Some of the things that I had to really examine about myself is what do I actually like? Because growing up, I would assimilate, right? I would like things that other people liked so I could talk to them and engage with them. I would do these things. I kind of became a chameleon in a way of trying to interact and build connections. And yeah, there was a lot of failed relationships. There was a lot of failed connections. And so when I really started looking at myself and who I am as a person, I was like, what do I like? What are my interests? Um, what do I like doing? Who am I? What are my values? What are my morals? What type of people do I want in my life? Who do I like do I want to be around? And I when I start really asking those questions and being honest, and then not being afraid to present that person to people, that's whenever I started developing true, good, long lasting connections. I have now, like, for a long time, there was a moment in my life where I had no friends. There was no one around. It was very lonely, it was very depressing, and it was, not a good time. But now I have some of the best friendships that I've ever had. I have really strong, good connections with people that care about me, that value me, that, want to see me succeed and support me, and vice versa. And it was because I took the time to really understand who I am as a person, um, and, and be okay with being that person.
That's
Um,
kind of that's kind of how I got diagnosed in the first place, because towards sort of 2023, I got burnt out with constantly camouflaging or masking, as you want to put it. And I kind of reached a point where I just wanted to say, fuck it. I'm tired of this. I'm tired of pretending, of going to work and pretending to be professional and all of this. And I just got tired of masking. But I think that's harder when you're an adult, when you've been around for 55 years, to suddenly kind of drop this mask and for people to see a different person there. It's when you're a teenager, you're kind of changing your persona quite a lot. You leave school and go to college, you often adopt a new persona because nobody knows you. When you're older, when you're in your 30s like you were, when you're in your 50s like I were, it's actually quite hard to suddenly say, well, this is actually the real me.
It is. And I don't want to diminish the challenge and honestly the pain that it can bring. Um, because when you really start examining yourself like that, you will lose people. You will lose
Yeah.
friends. You will, and it's not an if. It is a fact. You will most likely lose people. The people that stay are the ones that are willing to grow with you, and those are the ones that you want to value and hold on to. And I think we start learning the value of quality connections instead of quantity.
So basically, find someone who's happy with the new unmasked Tim or Michael, is what you're saying. And accept that not everybody's gonna react in a positive way.
Yeah, a lot of it is, a lot of it's the internal work that we have to do on ourselves. It's like, finding the confidence in yourself, building up your own self-worth, your own self-esteem. The one thing that I talk to people that struggle in that area is, you don't have to go from where you are to loving yourself. You can go from where you are to being okay with who you are. And then you go from being okay to liking yourself. And then you go from liking yourself to loving yourself. You can do a process, gradual process. And as you start to develop that more, um, you will discover that the people that honestly didn't like the fact that you stopped masking were probably benefiting from the fact that you were masking. So and those were not people to maintain in your life anyways. And so as you develop that, you will find people that accept you for who you are, and connect with you, and develop those connections.
And other people will reject you, of course, which brings you on to my next point, which is talking about RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, which I think for me is probably the most difficult and debilitating part of ADHD to deal with. For people who don't know what RSD is, it's basically the heightened sensitivity ADHD people have to criticism and rejection. I'm sure you've experienced that yourself.
So I'm probably one of the few people that is going to have a very different perspective of RSD. I don't like the term. And I can explain why. It's not from a just like I hate it for no reason. Um, number one,
You've rejected RSD.
yeah. Um, Number one, saying I have RSD doesn't do anything for you. There's no foundational steps of how do I support myself in this. Um, R is like, oh, my RSD is acting up, or I'm experiencing RSD. Like, what does that mean, right? So, as just a mental health awareness, and to help yourself and to feel better, it doesn't do anything for you. It doesn't give you enough information. It's a great communication tool, I think, in that aspect. Like, if you are having these heightened emotions and experiences, and if you tell someone, hey, I'm kind of experiencing RSD right now, that's a great, easy, quick way to tell someone that something's happening. And I think that on that level is useful. Um, on a more kind of technical side, the originator of RSD, Dr. William Johnson, when he presented RSD, there was no peer review science. There was no. It was just a thing that he presented, and then it took off, and it just blew up, and everyone adopted it and accepted it. And there's not a lot of research in it. There's not a lot of understanding it. Like there's nothing on a scientific, psychological side that confirms that this is a thing that exists in ADHD people. So uh, I believe there has been some research and ongoing things now, but it's still not a confirmed, substantiated thing. But when you really start looking at RSD, and I kind of like a sidebar for me too, like whenever I first started looking into my experiences, RSD is what showed up. And it's honestly the reason why I got my ADHD diagnosis. But as I started being in more spaces that were critical thinkers, and examining things, and like I've just been around a lot of different perspectives and things, and I started doing my own kind of like digging from my experience, and kind of trying to understand things, right? And so when you start looking at what they describe RSD as, you can start seeing pieces of other things within it. So there are trauma triggers So PTSD, CPTSD is a possibility. So that's like that height, like extreme emotional
Yeah.
reaction that is more, um, to me, that is more likely, right? That um, it is a trauma thing that's happening in certain cases. So that's one piece of it. And then you start seeing other pieces too that already exist and that we know are part of ADHD and other things. So emotional regulation is a ADHD struggle. So we struggle with emotions. So when you get rejected, you feel emotions and you struggle to regulate that emotion. And then that can domino into other things. So that can domino into um, the trauma triggers that can domino into, like, like I started looking into like attachment. So like I was a very anxious, attached person, and that was like self worth, anxiety, and all these things, and rumination. And then my trauma was I had a lot of abandonment trauma in my life. So there's a lot of abandonment issues that I had to deal with that affected my relationships. And then there is in the DSM and ICD rejection sensitivity without the dysphoria, just rejection sensitivity. That has been researched. That is a thing that we know exists, but it is in other things other than ADHD. So it's also in anxiety, OCD, depression, other things. Um, so that it can so rejection sensitivity can be a piece of that puzzle, but the other pieces of the puzzle matter as well. So what else is happening in that experience? So we can be sensitive to rejection or perceived rejection, and then the emotions happen, and then you struggle with emotional regulation. So the emotions become overwhelming, and then maybe there's a trauma trigger involved. For me, it was an abandonment struggle. And then that even heightened even more. And then like there's the anxious attachment side of things and like the self-worth and self-esteem issues and like that snowballed all together into this really, really overwhelming experience that negatively impacted me and like that was like I experienced this thing that was so overwhelming and like I said like I didn't know who I was, like my behaviors, my thought, my actions, like what was going on. And so, RSD is what led me to ADHD. But then as I started learning more, I'm like, oh no, there's these other things happening that I can work on because like what happened was, oh, like I have trauma that I need to work on. So I started working on my trauma. I have emotional regulation issues that's going on. So I started working on my emotional regulation. I have my attachment struggle. So I started working on that. So like I was able to find the pieces and like pinpoint the things I needed to work on. And that's why like just saying RSD is to me not as helpful because it's like, what does that mean?
There's, I don't know if you're familiar with a British ADHD podcaster, blogger called Alex Partridge. Have you come across him?
Not that I'm familiar with now.
He's very, very popular in the UK. He's probably like the face of ADHD in the UK. He has this theory. Now I'm not sure where his numbers have come from, but he's got a book coming out soon about RSD actually. His theory is that the reason adults with ADHD are so hypersensitive to criticism is because as children with undiagnosed ADHD, we're subjected to way more criticism than neurotypical kids. He said, I don't know where he gets this exact figure from, but he says 20,000 more criticisms as a kid.
Yeah,
I'm not quite sure where if you break that number down from ages 4 to 18, it only comes out to about 4 per day, whereas I think 4 per hour would have been more accurate in my youth. But anyway, he that's his theory, is that because we're criticized so much as kids without necessarily understanding why, that it makes us more sensitive to it as adults.
yeah, and that number, the 20,000 more criticism, that's been a number has been around a long
It's maybe
time.
not his theory. It's maybe somebody else's
Yeah,
theory.
yeah, that's been around a long time, and I don't remember exactly where it originated from. I don't remember like what the study was or who coined that, but like that's another thing that like on a psychological level or a scientific level hasn't been like confirmed. It sounds like it's possibly true because on a personal experience thing, like yeah, that resonates, right? Like, yeah, like throughout my life, there was a lot of little micro corrections and a lot of different things of like, oh, you're too loud, you're not sitting straight, you do that, all these things, right?
Were you
Um,
criticised at home as well, or was it at school? Because for me, it was both. I would be criticised all
oh,
day at school, then I'd come home and it would just carry on.
oh yeah, I mean, my dad was military, so yes, very much so. So yeah, like we experience a lot of lack of support, and misunderstandings. And especially when we're kids and young, we don't have the language to be able to communicate things, right? We don't know what's going on to be able to properly explain what's going on or tell people like, "Oh, I'm just dysregulated." Like that's a word that I didn't have in my lexicon back then, like
And also,
uh,
when you're a kid, you assume, often incorrectly, but you assume adults know what they're doing and they have the best
yeah,
intentions. You assume your parents know what they're doing. You assume teachers know what they're doing. When you get older, you realize that that's not necessarily always the
yeah.
case. But as kids, you don't necessarily challenge adults when they're criticizing you. You assume that they're right and that there's something you're at fault.
Yeah, and I think, um because of all these things, right, that we experience, trauma is a part of our life in a lot of places. There are people out there that are ADHD autistic probably don't have trauma, and it's very possible, especially if they have a great support system and people around them that understood exactly how to help them. But in people that never had that support until later in life, that's traumatic. It's struggling, and so kind of going back to like the RSD discussion is like, I don't think that created RSD. I think that created trauma. I think that created self esteem issues and self worth issues. I think that created anxious attachment or avoidant attachment issues. I think that created all these other things that we know more about and have specific ways to support than this kind of like nebulous thing called RSD.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and again, going back, it's a good communication tool. It's a good catch-all, but to me, ultimately, as a way to support yourself and feel better and heal and like um, learn how to experience rejection without those extreme reactions. Like it doesn't give you the tools. It doesn't give you the knowledge to be able to do that.
Talking about those childhood years like we just did, one of the things that happened when I was first diagnosed was looking back, and I'm sure this happens to everybody, and I'm sure you know what I'm going to say, is that you look back on your life and think, well, how different could my life have been? How much better could my life have been if this had been picked up earlier? It was when I was looking at autism tests online that I came across this test they do for kids. And I remembered having this test done at school when I would have been about 8 or 9. Never found out what the results were because I was having a few behavioral issues at the time. I contacted the school, but it was like 45 years ago, so they hadn't got records of it.
Yeah.
And I know that my parents were the type who wouldn't have wanted to accept maybe that they had a kid with learning difficulties, or there was the fact that I was very bright at school, so it was just thought, "Yeah, he's okay. There's no problem with him." So whatever happened with this test, it was brushed under the carpet, and it's kind of really bugging me now that if this could have been discovered, instead of being discovered in 2024, it could have been discovered in 1977, 78, and things could have been a lot different. And I'm sure I'm not the only adult ADHD person who feels that way.
Yeah, there's definitely a grief of the life that could have been, right? And I think that's a perfectly reasonable and understandable emotional experience to go through and to grieve and to go through that process. And I went through it, Um, that was a big thing, but like then I also started looking back. I'm like, okay, I wouldn't be the person I am now. I wouldn't have met the people that I met. I wouldn't have had the experiences I had, and also, like, who's to say that I would have things would have been different, right? I don't know. It's an unknown. We cannot really know for sure that things would have been better or different, because look at people who were diagnosed early and didn't have support Like I know a lot of people that were diagnosed when they were children, and I'm still here helping them figure things out when they're
I think
adults.
that was probably the fear with my parents, that if I was diagnosed and it was given some kind of official designation, I might be treated differently, because kids back in the 70s who had learning difficulties were generally put in special schools and special classes and were
Mhm.
separated from everyone else. And there was probably a feeling that that would have possibly been the worst thing that could have happened to me. And if they did think that, then they were probably right.
Yeah, because the culture was very different
Yeah.
back then.
Oh, we all
Understanding,
made fun of the special needs kids, in the
yeah,
70s. That was, you made fun of the special needs kids, and that was, sadly, that was it.
so there, you know, so think about those things is like the culture and support and knowledge was vastly different back then, and so there's no guarantee that things would have been better. There's no guarantee that things would have been um, different. It could have been worse. You
Yeah.
don't know. Um, and but again, like have the feelings, like experience, like go through that process, feel those things because like it's important to work through that. So you don't build that resentment and like anger and frustration. Like we want to work through and get in and let that go because what is the most important thing is now, right? Now, and so it's like, what are you going to do about it? Right? Are you going to stay in that past of like, well, shoulda, coulda, wouldas, and things would have been different, or are you going to grieve? You're going to feel those emotions and do what you need to do, and then look at yourself now and be like, okay, how can I help myself now? What can I do now? How do I move forward?
We've talked a lot about the more difficult, maybe negative sides of ADHD. What are there are obviously a lot of positives as well. We talk a lot about hyperfocus. ADHD people tend to be very creative. We have a very strong sense of injustice and social justice. We're quite resilient. We have a good sense of humor. What for you have been, do you think, are the things that the positives that ADHD brings to you?
Like it's I again, I probably have a different perspective than most people, because I have so like assimilated ADHD and autism, especially like as a part of who I am, that like it's really hard to say like ADHD made me this way because like I don't know the person I would be without being
Yeah.
ADHD. So I like who I am, right? Like I like me. I like my creativity. I like my passion. I like my ability to um, think about thinking, like the metacognition. Like it can be, it can be exhausting. I like to be able to sit there and like
Mm.
think about the things I'm thinking about. But I do like that because it brings a new level of awareness of things. It allows me to grow. It allows me to look at things differently than other people. I like the skills that I have. And is that because I'm ADHD? Is that because I'm autistic? I don't know. Um, there are some studies around like pattern recognition and things of that nature, and the people talk about justice sensitivity, but what is justice sensitivity? Because if you really look at it, like there are autistic people that we know for a fact are autistic that would probably say that they have justice sensitivity that are terrible people.
Yeah. You're
You
thinking
know,
of Elon Musk for one, possibly.
for one. And then there was the QAnon guy that was at the January 6th, thing. Like those people are autistic, and they probably say they have justice
Mm.
sensitivity too. So like, what is that, right? Like it's an individual moral experience. So like, being autistic or ADHD doesn't necessarily make us better in any way, right? Like we're not superior, we're not the next step of evolution, we're not these things, but we do have a different experience in life, right? We see things differently because of our experiences, um, and how our brain operates, how
Do
we
you do
work
you
through
think
things.
it's our experiences that make us see things differently? Do you think it's the ADHD itself, or do you think it's a bit of both?
I think when it comes down to it, yeah, I think there's some influence there, right? Because like both ADHD and autism are neurodevelopmental disorders, right? They are how our brain functions, and and there is always the neuroplasticity, right? Like we
Yeah.
have some ability to change things in that way. But like, to what extent does ADHD and autism have on us as an individual, right? Because like there are really terrible people that are ADHD autistic, and there's some really fantastic people that are ADHD autistic, right? Um, so it just depends on how you want to see it. And like, I'm not gonna tell someone like how they should feel about themselves. Like if like, oh, but like in my experience, my perspective is like, I like me now, right? Like now that I understand who I am, because like there was a time where I didn't like me. But I don't know if I would be a different person if I wasn't ADHD autistic, but I'm pretty confident I probably would be, right? Like there are probably things about my brain that wouldn't function the same way if it
You
was a
might be you
different,
might be another Elon Musk. You might be a much worse person without it. You never know.
or maybe I would just only have one hobby, and that seems kind of boring to me.
Yeah.
Like
I
like
did ask that. I did
mm,
ask that question because I know you've had time to assimilate your ADHD more than I have. I'm still kind of getting my head around it a little bit. But when I announced to everybody that I did have ADHD, I heard this thing from a couple of people who weren't ADHD people. They said, "Oh, it's a superpower. Embrace it. It's a superpower." And I think I find that quite patronizing almost and insulting for someone who doesn't have it to say that, because I don't consider being like not being able to hold down a job or being broken and unemployable at my
yeah.
age as evidence of some kind of superpower. There are superpowers within it, but I'm still trying to see the positives in it, and I'm not sure calling it a superpower is necessarily helpful.
Yeah, I don't think calling in the superpower is helpful. For some people, it might be, but honestly, I think those are the people that do call it a superpower, even those that are ADHD autistic that call it a superpower. I think they have a lot of internalized ableism that they need to work through, and they're still trying
Yeah.
to meet societal expectations and trying to mask and fit in and assimilate. Um, like you know, two things can be true at the same time, right? It's a disability. I'm disabled because of ADHD and autism. I'm the same, like working a normal job, I can't do. I cannot. Like, so that affects me financially, that affects me socially, that affects me in a lot of different ways. Um, my stress is through the roof a lot because I'm always worried about finances. Um, but I still like me. Like I like who I am. I like the person I am. Um, and so like both of those things can be true. And being disabled is not a bad thing. The word is it's not it doesn't make us less or inferior or anything like that. It's just understanding that, we need support. And when we have that support, we can, live pretty good lives,
We've been going for about 80 minutes. I'm gonna ask one more question, even though I know exactly how you're gonna answer this question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. If someone came up to you and said, "I've got a magic pill here. If you take it, your ADHD will be gone," would you prefer to keep your ADHD or would you take the pill?
I would keep it. Um, I wouldn't change who I am. Uh, be, there's again, like if it were to go away, like I don't know the person I would be. Um, and I don't know if I like, yeah, like it's one of those things. Like I'm used to my brain now. Like I like my brain, I like how I think. How I don't know how it would change.
Because my immediate reaction to that is, give me the pill, I'll take it. But at the same time, like you say, I'm 57 and I've had this brain for 57 years, and it's like, could I could I handle the shock of suddenly having a different brain after that long? I don't know.
Yeah, and like and I don't fault anyone that would say that they would want,
I
to
asked that
take that
question.
kind of
There's
thing.
there's a there's a UK podcast called I'm ADHD. No, you're not. I don't know if you know it. There's a doctor called Mina Combeyer, her name is, and her husband is Paul Whitehouse, who's quite a famous comedian actor in the UK. She's a therapist specializing in ADHD. He's
Mhm.
kind of an ADHD skeptic who isn't convinced that it actually exists. And on their podcast, they have people with ADHD talking, and she always asks that question at the end, and she always gets quite upset when people say they would actually prefer to get rid of their ADHD, which some people do.
Yeah, I don't get upset. Like I understand. That to me recognizes that there's still a lot of hurt and struggle in people, and maybe
Yeah,
people that have not learned to accept that they're disabled and to support themselves. And so like if you're in that like hole and if that was your option, I wouldn't fault anyone for taking that out. There is a kind of like really dangerous kind of pipeline to go into of like the eugenics and
Yeah.
all of that stuff. Like that's a deeper
let's not
overarching.
get
Yeah,
into eugenics on this
yeah,
podcast. I think
yeah. Like
probably not a good idea.
yeah, that's a big conversation to have, right? And so, but yeah, like no, I wouldn't take it because yeah, I'm at a point in my life that I'm okay with who I am. I'm good.
Good. Well, that was great, Michael. We've been going for about an hour and a half. I think that's my longest podcast yet, which I think says a lot about your qualities as a guest. Thank you so much for taking an hour and a half out of your time to join me. We've had a few technical issues, but hopefully I'll be able to edit those out in the final version. I'll also put a link in the podcast description to your Dueling Minds website as well, so people can find out more about you. Any one last piece of advice for any older adults out there who are struggling with ADHD or think they might have ADHD?
Yeah, I think ultimately, um, the ultimate goal shouldn't be about the label. And I like labels because labels are it helps me understand, right? Like of what the thing is. So it's not an anti-label sentiment, but more of the ultimate goal should be how can you improve your quality of life, right? um, and whether that's support systems, knowing, going to get an assessment and getting diagnosed, getting on medication, learning about these things. Ultimately, the goal is improving your quality of life. So if you're a person that thinks you're ADHD and you're only self-diagnosing, it's valid. And if you go and get assessed and it turns out you're not, no harm was done because you were trying to improve your quality of life. And that's all that matters.
Great. Well, thanks very much for joining me, Michael. Keep up the amazing work that you're doing.
I appreciate you having me.
Thank you. Thanks, Michael. Goodbye.
Bye.
Huge thanks to Michael for giving up 90 minutes of his evening to share his experiences and advice with me. It was enjoyable and also rather therapeutic, I have to say, to talk to him. And I hope those of you listening got something out of it too. Check out the podcast description for links to Michael's various online projects, as well as my book on Amazon. And of course, as always, don't forget to like, rate, comment, share, subscribe, and do anything else you can possibly think of to boost this podcast's exposure. Likewise, if you want to collaborate, either as a guest, advertiser, sponsor, or you just want to take me out for a beer or a coffee or whatever, please contact me on iwttai.podcast@gmail.com, and that email address is in the description too. Next time, we're talking dogs, specifically Thai street dogs, including one who has just become a film star with dog adoption charity founder Kirsty Smith, so look out for that one. In the meantime, see you then.